Perfect. So thank you all for joining us for the Qualitative versus Quantitative Research, which should you use workshop. Joining us today is Brittany Sterling, Social Sciences and Interdisciplinary Studies Librarian. She is going to discuss qualitative and quantitative research methods and review what types of research questions are answered best with specific methods. So I'm going to hand it over to Brittany.
All right, good morning, y'all. Give me just a second to share my screen. And bear with me because I do most of my meeting in Google Meet, so I might have some technical difficulties. Give me just a sec. Hang on just a second, y'all. I am having to go into my system preferences and check a box, I believe, and then we should be all right. And if not, Marlena, I may end up just sending you my slides, which I intended to do this morning, if it won't let me share. It's looking like checking the box is the problem, not the share button itself.
Yeah, no worries if I need to share for you.
Yeah,
I don't mind.
let me do that real quick. It'll probably be a faster fix. Sorry about that, everyone. Alrighty, they're on the way to you, Marlena. Sorry about that. Should have done it before.
Give me 1 second while I pull them up.
And then I'll just mention to you when to advance them. I appreciate it. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So I can start chatting since we're recording anyway, because slide 1 really just has the title of this presentation on it. So trying to choose between qualitative and quantitative data can be a little anxiety inducing, especially when you're starting, I feel like, an original research project. Also in your studies, when you're first learning sort of the difference between them, it can be a little bit confusing unless you have someone who goes into sort of advanced study design with you and things like that. So I'm sort of here to demystify some of that. I will say I am not the queen of data things. We actually have a data librarian here in the libraries, and if you have very specific questions after this, she's probably your better bet for getting more advanced things answered. She can also help with like data visualization and things like that. So yeah, just tossing that out there. I will give a few disclaimers too. I am the social sciences librarian. I tend to think of data in social sciences terms. So for those of you who are hard-hitting statistics junkies, I definitely have some examples in here for you, but if you feel like my bias is showing, it is just a little bit. So just want to throw that out there.
Just want to
Especially if
make
you're,
sure you're seeing the slides correct.
yep, I can see them.
Perfect.
Do you mind going to the next one for me? Thank you. So I thought in the agenda today, it's really hard to talk about which form of data without talking about, I didn't want to call it study design exactly because of course that depends on your individual research project and probably your department and major. And so this is sort of a more general overview of how to approach qualitative versus quantitative data. So we'll talk about project scopes, which I think we don't do a great job of necessarily teaching while we're in school. And until you start doing original research, sometimes you would have no idea of how to really put a project together. And so we'll cover that. We'll cover an introduction to qualitative data types and an example of research methods. And apologies, that may happen a few times. My office has a timed light in it, and I don't get to decide how to extend it. So I'll turn the lights back on. And then we'll also do an intro to quantitative data types, an example of some methodologies, and then sort of a quick overview of mixed methods. They also have their own research methodologies, but I am not as well versed in those, and so I don't have examples for those, but they're easy to find, and I will show you sort of how to do that. And then, of course, library resources to consider. A lot of times folks come to the libraries thinking of getting data in terms of like their research papers and helping find theories and things, but we actually do have probably about 10 databases that are good for just finding statistics and data. So I want to show you that, and I may be able to share my screen at that point and sort of show you where to find that stuff. Okay, thank you. So first, I want to talk about considering a project scope. And so for those of you who are sort of new to the idea of that, this is coming from the perspective of creating an original research project with these data types, right? The first thing you'll want to consider is sort of what your project's objectives are, which seems like a big, like, of course, we have this research question, but when you start getting a little bit granular into it, it can involve a lot more than that. So of course you want to consider what the goal of your research is, but also there's a little bit of a difference between the goal and the objective. So I would say a project goal is like the big picture impact that you want to make. So for instance, from a study that I'm in the middle of conducting now, a project goal would be to investigate the lived experiences of mid-career librarians. I'm in the middle of that project now. But an objective of that project would be to interview 5 academic librarians to ask about why they chose to stay in the field and what challenges up to this point has made sticking around sort of difficult or easy. And so it seems probably a little far off from the initial brainstorm, but actually thinking a little more deeply about that can get you to the research questions that you need to determine the data you want to collect that will then determine what kind of methods you use. So that's why I'm mentioning it first. In addition to that, you'll want to make a resource plan. And so a resource is literally anything that will be involved in your project, from equipment or financial funds to tech tools, researcher bandwidth, basically anything that helps you complete a project. And so I'm sure that a lot of you know this, but the reason you'll be wanting to consider that as you sort of design a study or explore an area of research is because the resources within that or the resources you explore might help you determine actually the data type. So for instance, the project that I just mentioned that I have done or that I'm in the middle of, I specifically applied for it through an organization that wanted sort of qualitative data out of it. So you can find those opportunities, of course, through things like the Office of Sponsored Programs, or if you belong to an association that's in your field and you're seeking to submit a project to them, you've got to read all the way through the fine print to sort of see what they want, and that might very easily determine data type things for you. After that, you'll want to think about the additional project requirements. So for instance, considerations like grant sources, co-investigators, timeline constraints, for instance, that project, I'll just keep going with it since I mentioned it already. My project was supposed to be completed within 1 year, and then COVID happened. And so also one of my co-investigators, had to sort of step back from the project. And so all of those things might change what you're able to do. Depending on data collection and things like that. You might have wanted to start out with a really robust sort of qualitative approach, and in the end, to get it done, you might end up with a quantitative approach instead because it is easier to accomplish, for instance. And that's not always the case. Sometimes one is easier, sometimes the other is easier. I promise I'll get 2 examples of sort of what they look like so you can have a grasp of that. And then also, the other thing that helps you with this is if you sort of have a loose outline of what your project is going to accomplish, and you can refer back to it again and again. So some of the things I mentioned were the part of life happens, right? And research needs may change or be impacted unexpectedly. So if you have the loose outline, you might be able to pivot where you need to. Like I said, either switching data types or switching collection methods or research methods. You can go ahead, Marlena. I'm sorry, I'm done with that one. Okay, so first, let's start with qualitative data. I don't know if, because I'm a social sciences person, sometimes people sort of joke about qualitative data as being the less concrete. I personally like it because I actually think it's a little bit richer than the quantitative type, but they both have their advantages and disadvantages, so I'll start with that. And this list is by no means exhaustive, but like a thing to think about. So, one advantage of qualitative data is it gives a chance to capture changing attitudes about a phenomena, motivations behind them, and sometimes when you are engaged in qualitative methods, you'll end up with data that doesn't have to fit a parameter, if you will. So, your hypothesis could have started out as A, and you end up observing phenomena that are over in Z, and that's still good data, if you will, and also can be helpful about trying to understand your research question. One of the disadvantages of qualitative research, according to those method scholars, is that it doesn't provide statistical representation. So it's perspective based. A lot of times people say it's not generalizable, and only comparisons are sort of possible. And so I sort of have opinions about that, but it can be those things can the disadvantage can sort of be counteracted with the mixed methods approach, which we'll talk about later. And so if you're really, really new to qualitative versus quantitative data, I'm sure at this point you have read this slide, but qualitative researchers typically gather multiple forms of data. It can be interviews, observations, documents, rather than relying on a single data source. And then this method also works towards solving complex issues by breaking them down into meaningful inferences or themes that can be more easily understood by all. And if you'll go to the next slide, Marlene, I'm sorry. Here are some examples of qualitative research methods. So one is something like a focus group. I'm sure if you've ever answered an online survey, you might have seen where people are recruiting for things like focus groups or interviews, that kind of thing. And generally, a focus group is a group of people assembled to participate in a guided discussion about particular subjects. So, for instance, I was just in one yesterday about how publishers can better support librarians of color. And so we talked for an hour and a half about observations in the field, and they gleaned information based on a few questions. It could also be something like giving ongoing feedback on a political campaign, or asking smokers to discuss their brand preferences or something like that. So that's a good example of a focus group. Then we have one-on-one interviews, which I personally think yield some of the richest data. And that can consist of questions about behavior, preferences, attitude, experiences on a topic or item, like how COVID-19 restrictions impacted individuals' social lives. And so usually what ends up happening in that case, which makes it different than a focus group is usually whatever sample size the researchers have decided. Instead, you would usually do a series of one-on-one interviews and then do your data analysis after compiling whatever amount is determined. Also, in this day and age, interviews can be conducted in person and online, which actually increases the sample size that researchers can use. And that used to be a critique of qualitative research, that sample sizes are too small. So now that makes life a little bit easier, and you can also interview more and more people. And then thirdly, I wanted to point out content analyses to people because they were newer to me. As I did my first original research project with a colleague. And so you can use a content analysis to look at compiled how do I say, compiled collections of things. So, for instance, the first original research project that I was involved in included finding particular years of conference proceedings and then analyzing each based on predetermined codes that we had determined. And then we did a comparative analysis between multiple years of two different conferences. And so in a content analysis, you're trying to determine the presence of certain words, themes, presence or lack of presence, I should say, of certain words, themes, and concepts. And researchers can quantify after that or analyze sort of what that presence or lack of presence may mean based on current understandings or relationships with certain words, themes, and concepts. So, for instance, in my colleague's case, we were looking at the prevalence of the words equity, diversity, and inclusion in some conference proceedings and how those increased, decreased, or weren't present based on two conferences that we had both attended. So hopefully that gives a little bit of concreteness, I guess, to the qualitative research method approach. If anyone ends up having questions, of course, you can drop them in the chat and I will try to acknowledge them at the end. I think you can go on, Marlena. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything for y'all. Okay, so quantitative data, which is numerical data, usually, for lack of a better way to explain, is often sought when a researcher wants to understand people's opinions, responses to an event. It can also ask for their motivations, but usually in a yes, no, kind of one option or the other, or only one option way is a good way to put it. And it usually identifies hard numbers, statistical analyses, mathematical methods, uses sample sizes or other counted or statistical indicators. Poll data is a good example of quantitative data. And it's sort of used as a more generalizable idea of what the larger population could or could not do in a certain situation, or to give like a graphable sort of sometimes visual sort of representation of a question that was asked. So you can go ahead, Marlena. Cool. So examples of quantitative research methods are things like descriptive study design. And so this method type seeks to describe the current status of an identified variable. And so that would be things like wanting to provide systematic information about a phenomena. The researcher in this case doesn't usually begin with a hypothesis, but is likely to develop one, after collecting data. So the analysis and synthesis of the data provide the tests of the hypothesis. So an example of this is a description of the kinds of physical activities that typically occur in nursing homes, or how frequently each occurs. They have static numerical representations, but they may not get at the why behind those things, which is where the qualitative data would come in. There's also the second example, which is correlational research. And so correlational research attempts to determine the extent of a relationship between two or more variables using statistical data. So in this type of design, relationships between and among a number of facts are sought and interpreted. This type of research will recognize trends and patterns in data, but it does not go so far as to prove causes for the observed patterns. There's a different method of quantitative analysis for that. And I should have said before explaining both of these, I just picked 3 examples across both methods and both data types. And there are many more. So if none of these is sort of intriguing to you as you're planning your projects, there are other things that you can look into. Let me see. Yeah, I think I got the most of that one. Cause and effect is not the basis of this type of research. So an example of correlational methods would be to look at the relationship between intelligence and self-esteem, not necessarily to prove anything about those two variables, just to look at the relationship. And then lastly, we have the experimental method, and it's often called true experimentation using the scientific method to establish the cause and effect relationship among a group of variables that make up a study. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's in a lab, but the effort is made to identify and impose control over all other variables except the one that is going to be explained. So an independent variable is manipulated to determine the effects of dependent variables. And so, especially if you're in one of the hard sciences, if you will, this is probably a method that you're using a lot. And so the example that I've listed here is like a comparison of the effect of personalized instruction versus traditional classroom instruction on a computational skill. So I hope that those kind of decloud a little bit for both method types, sort of what is what kinds of experiments you could be creating or what you could get from using either one. And so next we will talk about mixed methods, which the easy way to think about it for me is sort of a combination of both of these things. And so there are many ways to combine them though, which is where those study designs, I would encourage you, if you think that you're going to create a project that would require both, you actually look at the literature a little bit, which I will show you in a second, about what way you want to combine them. So you would use this kind of data and method type when you believe that combining a quantifiable result with the analysis of social phenomena would yield richer data. Excuse my typo there. So say you want to know whether parents' feelings about reading with their children affected children's reading scores. You could interview the parents, sort them into groups, with the groups assigned to how they were feeling, for instance, confident, mixed feelings, anxious, and compare the test scores of children whose parents fall into different groups. That would be a good mixed methods design because you're using qualitative data to inform the analysis of quantitative data, or the scores in this case. But you're never required to do this. I do think that I feel like studies with mixed methods appeal to more folks because it gets at the people who want really hard numbers and also offer some explanation, but I am biased, as I said before. And so you don't have to feel pressure to create a study with both in mind. But if you do, you might want to think about what the relationship between them will be. And that's where mixed methods design actually will probably be very helpful. And like I said, I only did not put those examples in here because I'm less familiar with them, but I can show you how to find them if you decide that the mixed methods approach is for you. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Marlena. Okay. So I just have a few slides of library resources to consider, and then yeah, sort of where you can get help on campus for thinking about this. And then when I'm done with this presentation, I'm glad to show you on the library website sort of where to find these things. And so this is just sort of a sampling of, you don't have to consider these specific library resources, but I tried very hard to pull a few things that actually show research about methods, which I know was very helpful to me as I started doing original research projects, because I think, at least in my experience, I'd had sort of the surface level introduction to these data types, kind of like what I'm doing today, right? But then when you start designing your study or whatever original research project you're going to do, and you have to explain it to the IRB or whatever organization is going to give you money or your grant funder or something like that, you have to get very explicit. And so I just wanted to give you all a sense of the materials that we actually have that you could look at. So we have everything from Enjoying Research in Counseling and Psychotherapy, which is a book. And I will say, for those who don't know, we do have a lot of ebooks and online access books. If you have done library searches before, we've increased them, especially during pandemic life. But there are stacks and stacks and stacks, y'all, upstairs for research methods and data types across all the disciplines. Seriously, there's just a little bit of something for everything. And so I totally encourage you, if you're starting a project, to consider actually coming into the library and looking, actually going upstairs to look. You can do obviously you're searching in the catalog first, but there's just a book just about for everything. So we've got how to do qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods in counseling and research. We have things like blending qualitative and quantitative research methods in medicine, which I don't know if we have any folks who are pre-med or will be going over to the medical school, but that's something to keep in mind. For those who are statistics junkies, we have things like design and analysis and educational research, ANOVA designs, and SPSS. SPSS are Stata. If anyone has questions about, I would say, how to use those things or suggestions for analysis, highly recommend making an appointment with our data librarian. She definitely has a better grip on those things than I do. And so she's not physically here right now, but you can make an online consultation appointment with her. And then we also have videos that sort of break these down into really small chunks. So as you can see at the bottom here, we have things that are like, I didn't look at this video per se, but I would assume it's probably not more than 10 minutes about the top tips for mixed methods, or when you should choose a qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods approach. So if you're used to looking in the databases for things like theory or trying to get excerpts from mostly from reading, I just wanted to give you an example that there's tens of thousands of study design methods and data collection, articles, books, videos, other resources in the stacks as well. Go ahead, Marlena. Thank you. Okay, and so I just want to give you also really quickly library databases to consider. And so I think a lot of times between the subject areas, when we are looking for things like theory or industry information, these databases don't actually get shown very often. And so I thought it made sense in the context of this presentation to let you know they exist. And so we actually have a database called Sage Research Methods, and it has tools and content to help design research projects. It can help you plan a study, learn a little bit more deeply about the methodological approaches, gather data. Sorry for my word slips this morning, y'all. I don't know what's going on. And understand findings. And so this will actually look quite a bit different than most of the other databases because it is almost like an interactive tutorial kind of thing. This particular publisher is based, its focus is social sciences research, but it has tools for learning them for both data types and methods. And you actually can go in and sort of do sort of mini courses on each if you really want to go deep. And so I will show you that in just a second. We also have Social Explorer, which is a census data, a US Census database. And you can also get demographic info through it. So unlike some of the other databases, I just saw that they did an update, so it looks very different, but you basically can go through and sort of click on pieces of the country to, usually I think a little pop-up will hover that sort of shows you the population demographics, ages of people, gender identity, however it was collected in that particular year that you are looking at. And you can also go in and sort of control for other factors that you want to look for from the census. So I highly recommend that if you are going to use data sets that already exist. I didn't really talk about that, but you are also able to use someone else's data collection in your original research project. So that's what some of these latter databases will give you. So things like Statista here provides data about market and opinion research, as well as things from business organizations and government agencies. There are statistical abstracts of the US, which is mostly US-based social, economic, and political statistics. And then Data Planet, I actually haven't had as much of a chance to play around with, but if you are a data junkie or need data sets, I highly suggest going there. I can ask Callie at a later date, if she's the data librarian, if she has seen the update for it. It contains some of the other databases we used to have, like local and state statistics and business statistics. They're all housed in this sort of new format. So say that you have a hypothesis about children's lunch programs, just pulling it out of thin air, and how sort of their effect sort of has changed since school was changed during the COVID-19 phenomena. You can go in and look at many years of collection about that particular subject in Data Planet, and I believe Statista as well, and use like comparative years to sort of explain your hypothesis. So if you'll go to the next one, Marlena. Okay, so I know I've been talking for a while, but to recap, both quantitative and qualitative research help investigate phenomena. They can both measure impact and they both have validity. Um, Depending on your departments, you might have been told that one is bad and one is good, or one is more reputable and one isn't. And I would argue that it's probably bad practice to say that. It's more like which case fits for what it is you're trying to do. And even as you're exploring for your classes, other people's research, it also gives you a new lens through which to understand why they chose the methods, theories, and came to the conclusions that they sort of did when all of it combines. So just sort of keep that in mind, and as you develop yours, depending on what you want to prove or disprove or hypothesize, you can pick whichever works for you. They both can be rich in explanation and translated to an audience to explain results. I will give the tip that for my quantitative junkies out there, the one thing that I would do in explaining your own research is practice, possibly, even if you don't do the qualitative mixed method approach, explaining your quantitative results to lay people. And what I mean by that is the average person, I don't think, gets a whole lot of statistical analysis understanding training in K-12 school. You know, I didn't. I don't think most of us did. And so if you are conducting an original research project, you'll want to think about the delivery of your results as both you're writing up the paper and sort of so that the every person is able to understand you know, your graph or your chart or whatever, so that more and more people can understand what it is that you're trying to convey to the rest of the world. And then the reason for choosing a particular type may vary by discipline. So, like I said, I am definitely biased to the methods of qualitative because they are used a lot in social sciences. However, um, a few of the research projects I've now done have really been more of a mixed methods approach. I would say a very light version, but you can start with qualitative data, for instance. The content analysis project that I mentioned. After we, you know, went through and did our coding and then came together and decided on the themes that were emerging, we then did actually crunch the numbers to use percentages to explain a comparison. And so sometimes you'll end up doing that kind of thing by accident when you didn't plan to in the project scope. And it's okay to do that. I just want to make that normalized because I know in some disciplines you sort of start where you start, and if you veer at all or change at all, then it's looked at kind of negatively. But honestly, sometimes needing to pivot just a bit actually increases the richness of the results you're able to convey. So that's enough of me talking. Marlena, if you will let me share my screen, I will show y'all. Oh, yeah, sorry. Let me do that one, and then I'll show y'all sort of where to find these databases. Um, okay, so university contacts for study design help. Of course, you can always meet with your subject librarians. People have different levels of, I would say, statistical understanding, y'all. So if you're like a hardcore quantitative person, it may just depend on your subject librarian. We all had very different lives before going to library school. So some people have more or less experience with the quantitative side of things, or even data collection overall. It's not necessarily necessary in every library school program, so bear with us. But if we can't help you, you can always reach out to our data librarian, who I mentioned, and she can help with various aspects that you haven't necessarily thought about. I mentioned a project scope. She can help you with the data management plan, which is sort of the life cycle your data is going to go through, and sort of the continuation of brainstorming a project scope. And so that's an option. We also have health sciences librarians, which I don't know that people always know about. Um, and they help with different kinds of study design. So, for instance, I'm self proclaimed, I know the least about this. They can help with things like, or help advise about things like systematic and scoping reviews, which require different kinds of data altogether. um, but some folks who are nursing majors, for instance, may catch here. Um, or like in some sort of pre-med program before hopping over to the medical school. So just sort of keep that in mind when you're on the librarian appointment page. We're all sort of by different tabs, so don't get frustrated if you don't see the differences on one page. If you have a little patience, you'll be able to find everyone. And then, of course, you can always ask questions of the IRB office, depending on what kind of project you're going to do. You may have to do more or less explaining, is what I will say. And so that's where the project scope in the beginning really sort of helps set up whatever kind of research you're going to conduct, and what you hope to get out of it. And it'll sort of help keep you on track as you refer back to it from time to time. Then, of course, lastly but not leastly, the Office of Sponsored Programs, which, if you've not had the chance to check out, is a good place to find grant funding. Remember how I was mentioning that looking for the resources for your projects? And in particular, if you choose to accept money for projects, there are also different things to consider with that, depending on the funder. They have different requirements, different things you need to report, all kinds of things that don't seem related to your data or data collection in the least that really, really are. So I just wanted to mention those things because even when people have sort of heard them in passing, sometimes you forget. So that's the end of my presentation. The only thing I have left for y'all is I should be able to do this. If Marlena will let me share my screen, I will show you where to find those statistical databases on the library site. Hopefully my computer will let me do that. And if it does not, I might have you do that too, Marlena. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, y'all. Technical difficulties always happen at the wrong time. Yeah, do you mind opening a Chrome window for me, Marlene? I'm sorry, I will tell you where to go. This is good practice for me to explain clearly as well. So sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, so I would say there are a few different ways to do this. If you go to hover over that Research Borrow request link up there, you will get a drop-down menu that says Databases. Will you click on Databases for me, Marlena? Thank you. And then you can go to all database types, the second drop down that's up at the top.
Okay, here we go.
And if you scroll all the way down, you will see there's a link for statistics and poll data. There's also a few, that's fine that you clicked on it.
Okay.
That's fine, you're totally fine. So if you scroll down this list, you're fine.
Oh, this
on
list.
this
Okay.
page. I'll go back there. You can sort of see the data sets that we already have that you can sort of pluck from to do your own research if you're not collecting, for instance. And so there's things like public opinion surveys. Most of the S's here are the things that I explained in my presentation. And so as you can see, the ones that have gone black, they've now migrated to Data Planet, that one of the resources that I mentioned. And so that's where you'd find things like local and state or business stats. The SAGE research methods is the place that I was mentioning you can go to sort of learn how to do research. Will you click on that one for me, please? Thank you. And so this looks so different from any other database, of course, if you have done searching with the libraries before. And so as you can see here, they've made it fairly easy. Of course, you can put something in the search, but there's videos about methods. There's quick answers and definitions to terminology, which, by the way, I just want to mention, it does not matter how long you've been in school. If you're doing study design and creating original research projects, there's a lot of jargon, so there's no harm in looking through a reference or encyclopedia. You can look through quantitative methods, qualitative methods that I mentioned. I like this cases tab because it helps sort of display how people explain their research, as I was mentioning, to the layperson, or sort of cases in action. And then you can practice data analysis, as you can see, design a research project, listen to people who just love talking about research methods on podcasts. And then I have not gone through this conduct studies online tab. And so if someone goes through and finds something really interesting, please let me know. Will you go back one, or you can close this one, however. Yeah, cool. Will you click on Social Explorer for me, please? It is back in the S's.
Yes. There we go.
Thank you. Okay, so if you recall, I was mentioning that Social Explorer will allow you to look at census data and demographic data. Um, as you can see, we're sort of highlight here, but you can use this to sort of explore data from even down to like the county level. If you're seeing these different colors, I'm sure there's a graph explaining them, but I have done things like, for instance, looked at the demographics of a specific part of Las Vegas in the year 2010 or something like that. You can do it all across the US, and of course, it looks like they have some COVID-19 data you could look at if that's a thing that you are willing to research. And then there's, of course, training modules sort of to see how to use this better. You can see there's things like business patterns, crime statistics, and things like voting age populations, and all kinds of things, from education to health to government programs, all kinds of stuff. So if you weren't aware this existed, now you know. Okay, back to that tab for me, please. And then y'all, of course, are welcome to go through and click through these. Will you scroll up for me, please, Marlena?
Yes.
Okay, so there's also things like, I know I've been real heavy in sort of like social phenomena, but there's also things like this eMarketer database where you can get consumer information or opinion sorts of things. We have essential science indicators here, and then historical statistics. So especially if you're going to do a longitudinal comparison, like I mentioned before, you can use that, or ICPSR, which is down here as well, to find large, really huge data sets, y'all, where there are things like thousands or tens of thousands of people who are surveyed or questioned in some form or something like that. And those are going to be more like your quantitative numbers, but you can use them also to inform your hypothesis if you're doing something qualitative. Okay, I'm sure you get the point. You can sort of play around with them, and if you get stuck, feel free to reach out. You also can, as you can see on the screen, if you don't need me per se, because it's not social sciences, you can always click this chat now button. We're on a rotation. So you might get, whoever is at the desk will forward your question to the correct person. So if you're like me, you need to get out of your brain while you're thinking about it, and you don't know the email address, that's probably your best bet. Okay. Will you just do a complete back of the screen for me, Marlena?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna go back to that research bar request again. If you go to research guides, please. This is everything by subject, but we do have a data guide. If you keep scrolling down, it should be below dance there. Yep. Go ahead and click on it. And so you can see sort of what we have as far as some introductions to a little bit more in-depth introduction to these various things, right? We don't currently have an ArcGIS person, but we do sort of have some tips for how to use it if you want to try to tackle it yourself. There's also things like getting started with these various things that are sort of like a foreign language to me. I'm not gonna lie, y'all. This is why we have a data librarian. But also things like data visualization. So that how to communicate your story to people in a way that if they're not in your field, they could still understand you. So you could look at infographics, um, the data visualization, and then if you click on data and statistics here, it will take you to another version of all of the resources we have where you could find data and statistics. I would also say if you're a more advanced researcher and you have not considered a data management plan, meeting with Hallie is a really good idea because she knows sort of, she might have some insight into the blind spots you didn't know you need to be keeping track of as your study sort of progresses. Yeah, and so if you'll go back to the main page one more time for me, Marlena, I will stop talking. Okay, and so if you decide that chat is not quite enough for you, you can of course oh, just kidding. About the help and support. Help and support is what I need you to hover over. I'm so sorry. Okay, so of course you have meet with the librarian twice on this page. Will you just click that link for me so I can demonstrate the different kinds? And so all the subject librarians are listed here, of course. The research consultation tab will take you to most of the, I would say, I don't want to say humanities, but it sort of defaults to everyone who's in lead, basically, which is our main library. And so you can scroll through to see what people are available to help you with and schedule appointments with them. I will say, because this has come up before in other workshops, it may seem like someone never has any time. I promise that's not the case. We're just really, really actually very busy here. And so what most people do is designate a certain number of hours a week to do research consultations. Our calendars are not just open for them. So if you were to click on someone and you saw they didn't have time until, March 12th, they probably really, their calendar is blocking um, whatever times they probably designated before because we are very busy. So don't let that discourage you. If you have the time, definitely just click on their next appointment. We are not ignoring you over here, I promise. I just think people have the perception that we're sort of waiting for research consultations and then they get frustrated when there's no appointments for a few weeks. And so I just want to toss that out there. But if you can see at the top, you can click through to the medical library consultations. They can help you with health sciences related things. We do have a subject librarian here on Leeds campus that helps with public health, nursing, and integrated health sciences before the medical school sort of level. But you could also meet with my colleague Heidi here. She is actually working mostly with medical students, and then Katie can help with health literacy and community engagement. So even if you're mainly on Leeds campus, you can still meet with them. And they have very rich skill sets that might be able to set you up as you try to sort of make the transition. And then you'd find Hallie under, for whatever reason, the lead technology consultations. I'm not sure why they have put her on this page, but that's where she is. And so as you can see, you can request help from her for data management, processing and manipulation, and finding and creating data. So she is definitely your best resource for that because of her skill set. So I just wanted to physically show y'all where to find us, just in case. And with that, I've been talking for almost 55 minutes. Does anyone have sort of a general question? I know that was a lot of information. Um, even if I can't answer it, I might be able to tell you who can answer it.
Yeah, this is really great. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm always I'm always nervous about striking the balance between giving you enough to get started and like overwhelming you with way too much, but it's hard with data types to not do that. So I'm very glad. Thank you, Barbara.
So I was wondering if I should go to the IRB if I have a question about whether or not my research is needs IRB approval, for example. Would a librarian help with that, or do I have to go directly to the IRB and ask a silly question?
No, totally not silly. I would definitely recommend going to the IRB just because even if you need IRB approval, there are levels to that, right? So, like, I've done some exempt projects which required explanation, but had to go through less review than some other, I don't want to say more rigorous, but like where there's a fine line between what you're going to do. Those have other distinctions. It also makes a difference if you're going to use human subjects or not, use animals or not, use children or not. It's way easier to ask them
I
because
see. Okay.
something that could have worked for me pre-COVID, they might have tightened up on since. So yeah,
I see. Okay, thanks a lot.
you're welcome.
Do we have any other questions for our speaker today? Well, before we end today's session, I just want to thank Brittany so much for being here and sharing her expertise. And thank you all so much for joining us. I am dropping a link in the chat. If you could just take a few moments to fill out our workshop feedback survey. It means so much to us and it helps us improve the workshops that we provide everybody. And with that, I will dismiss you all for the day. Thank you all for being here. Have a great day.
Thanks, Marlena, for sharing your screen.
Of
I
course.
appreciate
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you so much.
that.
That was so great.
Bye.